Ambassador Zethric's 4 eyes blinked in sequence as he studied the holographic display floating before him. The blue-green planet called Earth rotated slowly, its surface marked with swirling clouds and vast oceans. According to the Galactic Council's intelligence reports, this world housed the newest species to achieve faster-than-light travel: humans. Such an unremarkable planet, muttered Commander Vextal from across the bridge of their observation vessel. The reptilian officer's scales shifted from deep green to pale yellow, indicating his nervousness. Hard to believe something dangerous could come from such a place. Zethric's tentacles curled thoughtfully around his ceremonial staff. As a senior diplomat from the Ethereal Collective, he had witnessed the rise and fall of dozens of civilizations across the galaxy. Most followed predictable patterns. They developed technology, expanded cautiously through space, and eventually either joined the galactic community or destroyed themselves through war or environmental collapse. Humans, however, seemed different. The first reports had come from the Outer Rim territories 3 months ago. A human exploration vessel had encountered a Krillian raiding party attacking a civilian transport. Standard protocol dictated that any rational species would either flee or attempt diplomatic negotiation when faced with the galaxy's most feared pirates. The humans had done neither. According to the surviving Krillian testimonies, the human ship had immediately positioned itself between the raiders and their prey. When the Krillians demanded surrender, the human captain had responded with something the translators were still struggling to interpret. The closest approximation was, "Come and take it." What followed defied all established tactical doctrine. The human vessel, significantly smaller and less armed than the Krillian ships, had charged directly into their formation. It fired with reckless abandon, ramming one pirate ship and detonating its own engine core to take out another. The crew had fought with such ferocity that the remaining Krillians fled in terror, spreading tales of mad apes who laugh at death. Since then, similar reports had flooded in from across known space. Humans seemed to appear wherever conflict erupted, throwing themselves into battles with complete disregard for odds or survival. They fought alongside anyone who needed help, asking nothing in return except the chance to stand against tyranny. "The Council is frightened," Zethric admitted to his aide, a young Arcturian named Myth whose silver skin flickered with bioluminescent patterns of concern. "In 3 months, humans have destabilized power structures that took millennia to establish. The hegemony lost 6 sectors to rebellion after humans showed local populations that their oppressors could bleed. The syndicate slave trade collapsed when human volunteers started freeing cargo ships. Myth's light patterns shifted to confusion. But surely they must want something in return? Territory? Resources? Trade agreements? That's what makes them so terrifying," Zethric replied, his voice dropping to a whisper. "They seem to fight purely for the sake of others. No species does that. No rational species, anyway." The communication console chimed, and the ship's AI announced an incoming priority message from the Galactic Council. Zethric activated the holographic projector, and the stern face of High Counselor Nexron materialized before them. "Ambassador Zethric." The ancient being's mechanical voice crackled through the speakers. "What is your assessment of the human situation?" Zethric straightened his formal robes. "Counselor, I believe the humans represent an unprecedented anomaly in galactic civilization. Their behavior patterns suggest a species driven by principles rather than profit or survival." "Principles?" Nexron's optical sensors flared brighter. "Elaborate." "They seem to possess an innate compulsion to protect those who cannot protect themselves. In every recorded encounter, humans have willingly sacrificed their own welfare for complete strangers. They call it doing the right thing." The High Counselor's metallic features remained expressionless, but Zethric detected subtle vibrations in the transmission indicating deep thought processes. After several long moments, Nexron spoke again. "The Council has reached a decision. You're to make formal contact with the human government and extend an invitation to join our organization. Perhaps bringing them into established diplomatic channels will moderate their behavior." Zethric felt his heart skip several beats. "Counselor, with respect, I believe that may be unwise. Preliminary psychological profiles suggest humans view any form of authority with suspicion unless it proves itself worthy through action. Nevertheless, the directive stands. The galaxy cannot tolerate such unpredictability. Either the humans conform to civilized standards, or they must be contained. The transmission ended, leaving Zethric staring at empty space. Around him, his crew exchanged nervous glances. The concept of containing humans seemed particularly troubling given their recent displays of military effectiveness. Set course for Earth, Zethric ordered reluctantly, and send a formal communication requesting an audience with their leadership. The journey to Earth's solar system took 3 standard days. As they approached, Zethric was surprised by the relatively modest space infrastructure surrounding the planet. A few orbital stations, some mining operations in the asteroid belt, and several patrol craft that looked almost primitive compared to standard galactic technology. Their technology is at least 50 years behind current standards, reported Science Officer Krillnex, her insectoid features clicking with amusement. These beings achieved faster-than-light travel through brute force engineering rather than elegant physics. But Zethric noticed something the science officer had missed. Despite their technological limitations, the human patrol ships moved with purpose and coordination. Their formation suggested intensive training and discipline. These weren't the chaotic movements of a newly spacefaring species, but the calculated positioning of experienced warriors. The first human transmission came as they entered the outer system. A clear voice speaking in surprisingly accurate galactic standard filled the bridge. Unknown vessel. This is Captain Sarachon of the Earth Defense Force. Please state your intentions and prepare for inspection. Zethric activated the communication system himself. Captain Shun, I am Ambassador Zethric of the Galactic Council. We come in peace, seeking diplomatic contact with your species. There was a pause before the response came, tinged with what the translator identified as suspicion. Ambassador, you're welcome in our system, but you'll forgive us if we maintain escort protocol. We've heard the galaxy isn't always as peaceful as advertised. Within hours, 3 human vessels had formed up around their ship, guiding them toward Earth's primary orbital station. Zethric studied the escort ships carefully through the viewports. They bristled with weapons and armor plating that looked hastily but effectively added to their original designs. These weren't exploration vessels or trade ships, but purpose-built instruments of war. The orbital station impressed him despite its crude appearance. Massive rotating sections provided gravity through centrifugal force rather than the elegant gravitational manipulation most species preferred. But it was clearly designed as both a diplomatic facility and a fortress, with weapon emplacements positioned to cover all approach vectors. As their ship docked, Zethric caught his first glimpse of humans in person through the airlock windows. They were smaller than he had expected, bipedal mammals with soft-looking skin and relatively weak physical characteristics. Yet something in their movements, the way they carried themselves, suggested they were far more dangerous than their appearance indicated. Captain Shin met them at the airlock, flanked by 2 guards wearing powered armor that hummed with energy. She was a middle-aged woman with graying hair and scars on her face that spoke of combat experience. Her eyes held the steady gaze of someone who had faced death and learned not to flinch. "Welcome to humanity, Ambassador," she said, extending her hand in what their cultural briefings had identified as a greeting gesture. "I hope you'll find our accommodations suitable. The Secretary General is eager to meet with you." As Zethric reached out with one tentacle to shake the offered hand, he felt the calluses on Captain Chin's palm and noticed the slight tremor in her grip that suggested cybernetic implants. This woman had been changed by war, shaped into something harder than her species' baseline. "Captain," he said carefully, "I must ask, are all humans warriors?" Chin's expression shifted slightly, and for a moment he saw something ancient and predatory flash behind her eyes. Then she smiled, but it didn't reach those steel-gray eyes. "Ambassador," she replied, her voice carrying undertones that made his translator struggle with emotional context. "Every human is a warrior. We just don't all wear uniforms." As they walked through the station's corridors, Zethric observed the human crew going about their duties. They moved with efficiency and purpose, but he noticed how their eyes constantly tracked potential threats, how they positioned themselves to cover each other's blind spots without conscious thought. These weren't the movements of a peaceful species that had recently discovered war. These were the ingrained reflexes of beings born into conflict, shaped by millennia of struggle into something the galaxy had never encountered before. For the first time since accepting this assignment, Ambassador Zethric began to understand why the universe trembled at the mention of humanity. They weren't just another species with advanced technology or superior numbers. They were something far more dangerous. Beings who had learned to make war an art form, and who chose to wield that terrible skill in service of complete strangers. As Captain Shun led him toward the diplomatic quarters, Zethric realized that the Galactic Council had made a fundamental miscalculation. They weren't dealing with a species that could be contained or controlled. They were dealing with something that would reshape the very nature of galactic civilization, whether the established powers liked it or not. The diplomatic meeting room aboard the Earth orbital station felt cramped compared to the vast chambers Zethric was accustomed to in galactic facilities. Human architecture favored function over grandeur, with reinforced bulkheads and emergency systems visible throughout the space. Even in their diplomatic areas, these beings prepared for war. Secretary General Maria Santos entered the room with a confidence that reminded Zethric of apex predators from his homeworld. She was younger than Captain Shun, perhaps 40 standard years, with dark hair pulled back in a severe style and eyes that missed nothing. Behind her walked two advisors, a tall man with the bearing of a military officer and an elderly woman whose cybernetic arm gleamed under the artificial lighting. Ambassador Zethric, Santos said, settling into her chair with fluid grace. I'm honored by the Galactic Council's interest in humanity, though I suspect this isn't purely a social call. Zethric arranged his tentacles around his ceremonial staff, buying time to formulate his response. Standard diplomatic protocol called for elaborate pleasantries and formal negotiations that could last for days. But something about the humans' direct manner suggested they preferred efficiency over ceremony. Secretary General, I bring greetings from the High Council and an invitation for humanity to join our organization. We believe your species would benefit from the wisdom and stability that membership provides. The military advisor, introduced as General Harrison, leaned forward slightly. And what exactly does this membership entail, Ambassador? In our experience, organizations that emphasize stability tend to be less interested in justice. The bluntness of the question startled Zethric. Most species spent considerable time dancing around such direct inquiries. The Galactic Council maintains peace through established law and order. Members enjoy protection, trade agreements, and access to advanced technologies in exchange for adherence to our regulations. Regulations? The elderly woman, Dr. Elizabeth Kane, according to the introductions, spoke for the first time. Her cybernetic arm hummed softly as she accessed a datapad. We've been monitoring galactic communications for several months now. Your regulations seem to permit slavery in 37 sectors, systematic oppression of over 200 species, and the concentration of resources among a handful of dominant civilizations. Zethric felt his heart racing. No species had ever challenged the Council's authority so directly during first contact. Dr. Kane, I understand these issues may seem concerning from an outside perspective, but the galaxy is complex. Sometimes difficult choices must be made to maintain the greater peace. Secretary General Santos leaned back in her chair, her expression unreadable. Ambassador, let me ask you something. In your travels, how many species have you encountered that actively fight to protect strangers without expectation of reward? None, Zethric admitted, until we encountered humans. And how many of your council members have personally risked their lives for the welfare of others? The question hung in the air like an accusation. Zethric realized he couldn't name a single example. The council ruled through proxy forces and economic manipulation, never directly endangering themselves. General Harrison pulled up a holographic display showing recent human military operations. 3 weeks ago, our colony ship Endeavor encountered a hegemony patrol force demanding tribute from a refugee convoy. The ship was carrying families fleeing the Vorthan genocide. Children, elderly, wounded survivors. The hologram showed a massive human vessel positioning itself between the much larger hegemony ships and the defenseless refugee craft. The hegemony commander gave us 10 minutes to withdraw or be destroyed. Our captain's response was broadcast across all channels. A human voice filled the room, speaking with absolute conviction. This is Commander Janet Rodriguez of the Endeavor. We don't negotiate with bullies, and we don't abandon people who need help. If you want to hurt these refugees, you'll have to go through us first. The battle footage that followed made Zethric's blood run cold. The human ship was outgunned 10-1, but it fought with a ferocity that defied all tactical logic. When their weapons were destroyed, they rammed enemy vessels. When their engines failed, they continued fighting with emergency batteries. Even as their ship broke apart around them, the crew kept firing until the last possible moment. 78 humans died that day, General Harrison said quietly. But they bought enough time for the refugee convoy to escape and for our reinforcements to arrive. The surviving hegemony ships fled when they realized we had more vessels coming. Dr. Kane activated another display. We've analyzed Galactic Council records going back 3,000 years. In that entire time, your organization has intervened militarily to protect civilian populations exactly 0 times. You've mediated trade disputes, negotiated territorial agreements, and maintained the status quo. But you've never once sent ships to stop a genocide or break up a slave market. The accusation hit Zethric like a physical blow. The Council maintains neutrality to preserve peace across diverse species with different cultural values. Different cultural values? Secretary General Santos stood, her voice carrying steel undertones that made the translator struggle. Ambassador, we've seen the intelligence reports. The Krillian Syndicate has enslaved over 40 billion sentients. The Vorthan hegemony has systematically exterminated 18 species in the past century. The Trade Federation uses indentured servitude contracts that amount to legalized kidnapping. She walked to the viewport, staring out at the stars beyond. Your cultural diversity is a convenient excuse for letting the strong prey on the weak. And you want us to join that system? Zethric felt the weight of millennia of galactic civilization pressing down on him. Everything Santos said was true, but it was also irrelevant. The Council had learned long ago that attempting to enforce moral standards across different species led only to war and chaos. Secretary General, idealism is admirable, but the galaxy operates according to practical realities. The strong have always ruled the weak. The Council simply maintains enough order to prevent total collapse. Practical realities, General Harrison repeated, his tone suggesting those words tasted bitter. Tell me, Ambassador, do you have children? The question caught Zethric off guard. I spawned 3 offspring, yes. Would you die to protect them? Of course. Would you kill to protect them? If necessary. Then you understand the first principle of human civilization, Dr. Kane said. We are all children of the same species. Every human in danger is someone's son or daughter, parent or sibling. We cannot stand by and watch our family suffer. But these aren't your species, Zethric protested. The refugees from Vorthan Prime, the slaves in Krillian space, the oppressed populations across the galaxy. They're alien to you. Secretary General Santos turned from the viewport, her expression carrying something that made Zethric instinctively step backward. Ambassador, that's where you're wrong. Every sentient being capable of suffering is our family. Every child crying in a slave market is our responsibility. Every elderly being dying in a labor camp is our failure. She returned her chair, but her posture remained predatory. Humans spent thousands of years learning to expand our definition of family. First our tribes, then our nations, then our species. But we didn't stop there. We've learned that consciousness itself creates kinship. Intelligence creates obligation. General Harrison activated another display, showing human merchant vessels and exploration ships throughout known space. In the past 3 months, human civilians have initiated 47 rescue operations across 12 sectors. Our freighter captains reroute their ships to assist anyone broadcasting distress signals. Our explorers share medical supplies and technical knowledge freely. Our diplomats negotiate prisoner releases at their own expense. This behavior is unprecedented, Zethric admitted. But it's also unsustainable. You cannot save everyone. Maybe not, Santos acknowledged. But that won't stop us from trying. And every being we save, every slave we free, every tyrant we stop, changes the equation. Hope spreads faster than fear, Ambassador. People see that resistance is possible, and they start to resist. The truth of her words chilled Zethric to his core. The reports from across the galaxy confirmed it. Human intervention had sparked dozens of rebellions and independence movements. Species that had accepted oppression for centuries were suddenly fighting back, inspired by the example of beings who seemed willing to die for strangers. Dr. Kane leaned forward, her cybernetic fingers drumming against the table. Your council is afraid because they've built their power on a fundamental lie, that suffering is inevitable, that the strong must rule the weak, that individual lives don't matter in the grand scheme of things. Humans prove that lie false simply by existing. We show that another way is possible, Santos continued, that civilizations can be built on principles other than exploitation and fear. That's what really terrifies your masters, isn't it? Not our military capabilities, but our example. Zethric found himself unable to respond. Everything they said aligned with his own observations, but accepting their viewpoint meant acknowledging that his entire civilization was built on moral compromise and willful blindness. The Council will not tolerate continued interference in established order, he said finally, falling back on official positions. If humanity refuses to integrate into existing systems, other measures may be necessary. The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. General Harrison's expression hardened into something that reminded Zethric why humans were already legendary among galactic military forces. Other measures? Santos asked, her voice carrying dangerous undertones. Are you threatening us, Ambassador? Zethric realized he had made a critical error. These beings weren't intimidated by threats of superior force. If anything, the prospect of conflict seemed to energize them. I'm merely stating the reality of the situation, he said, trying to regain diplomatic footing. The Council commands vast resources and experienced military forces. Humanity is a single species with limited technology and no established alliances. Santos smiled, but the expression held no warmth whatsoever. Ambassador, I think you're operating under some fundamental misunderstandings about human nature. Let me clarify something for you. She stood again, her presence seeming to fill the room. Humans don't fight because we expect to win. We fight because fighting is right. We don't calculate odds before helping others. We don't weigh cost against benefit before standing against evil. General Harrison activated one final display, showing human settlement patterns across explored space. In 3 months, we've established contact with over 60 species. Not trade agreements or diplomatic treaties. Personal relationships built on mutual aid and shared struggle. The display highlighted dozens of locations where human civilians worked alongside alien populations, sharing technology and resources freely. Medical teams treating plague outbreaks, engineers building water purification systems, teachers sharing educational techniques. Your council sees individual planets and exploitable resources, Dr. Kane explained. We see neighbors and friends. When you threaten humanity, you threaten everyone we've helped, everyone we've befriended, everyone we've saved. Santos returned to her seat, her expression now coldly professional. So yes, Ambassador, humanity is a single species with limited technology. But we're a single species that 60 others have watched fight impossible odds to protect the innocent. How do you think they'll react when the Galactic Council declares war on the beings who freed their children from slavery? For the first time since beginning his diplomatic career, Zethric felt genuine fear. The humans had done something no species in recorded history had managed. They had built alliances based on trust rather than mutual benefit. They had created loyalty that couldn't be bought or negotiated away. The galaxy's power structure depended on keeping different species isolated and suspicious of each other. But humans were weaving connections across the void, binding diverse civilizations together through shared principles rather than economic necessity. What do you want from us? He asked quietly. Santos leaned back, her expression softening slightly. Nothing, Ambassador. That's what you don't understand. We're not trying to conquer the galaxy or build an empire. We just want to help. But the Council will never accept that, Zethric protested. They'll see human expansion as a threat to their authority. Then, they'll do what threatened powers always do, General Harrison said grimly. They'll attack. And when they do, they'll discover why the universe trembles when humans go to war. The meeting ended with polite formalities, but Zethric left Earth's orbital station with a terrible certainty that he had witnessed the beginning of a galactic revolution. The humans hadn't sought conflict, but they wouldn't avoid it either. As his ship departed Earth's system, Zethric began composing his report to the High Council. But how could he explain that humanity's greatest weapon wasn't their technology or their tactics, but their absolute refusal to accept that suffering was inevitable? How could he make them understand that they faced an enemy who considered every enslaved being a family member, every oppressed population a personal responsibility, every act of tyranny a call to action? The universe trembled not because humans were the strongest species, but because they were the only species willing to die for strangers without asking why. The emergency session of the Galactic Council convened in the ancient halls of Nexus Prime, an artificial world built specifically to house the galaxy's governing body. Representatives from over 300 species filled the massive amphitheater, their various forms of communication creating a cacophony that the universal translators struggled to process. High Counselor Nexron's mechanical form dominated the central podium, his optical sensors scanning the assembled delegates. Ambassador Zethric sat in the ethereal collective section, his tentacles wrapped nervously around his ceremonial staff as he prepared to deliver his report on the human situation. The session is called to order. Nexron's synthesized voice echoed through the chamber. We are here to address the growing concern regarding the species known as humans and their destabilizing influence on established galactic order. Counselor Vraktesh of the Hegemony rose first, his imposing reptilian form radiating barely controlled rage. Honored counselors, the human problem has escalated beyond mere inconvenience. 3 of our tribute collection fleets have been destroyed by these barbarians. Our authority is being openly challenged by primitives who should be grateful for our protection. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the Hegemony alliance bloc. Zethric noticed that several species remained silent, their representatives avoiding eye contact with the more powerful faction leaders. The economic disruption is becoming severe, added Trade Federation Representative Qualnix, her insectoid features clicking with agitation. Human interference with our labor acquisition programs has created shortages across 17 sectors. Our profit margins have decreased by 32% in affected regions. High Council Nexron's sensors focused on Zethric. Ambassador Zethric, you have recently returned from direct contact with the human leadership. Present your assessment. Zethric rose slowly, acutely aware that every word could determine the fate of 2 civilizations. Honored counselors, I must report that humanity represents a fundamental challenge to our established governmental model. They operate according to principles that prioritize individual welfare over systemic stability. Meaning what, exactly, demanded Counselor Thexmanar of the Krillian Syndicate, his scarred features twisted with contempt. They cannot be bargained with using conventional diplomatic methods, Zethric explained. Humans appear to value the protection of innocent life above their own survival. They will sacrifice themselves for complete strangers without expecting compensation or territorial gain. The chamber fell silent. In 3,000 years of galactic civilization, no species had ever demonstrated such behavior on a systematic level. Individual acts of self-sacrifice occasionally occurred, but never as a species-wide characteristic. Surely you exaggerate. Counselor Vextal interjected, his scales shifting to skeptical yellow patterns. No rational species would adopt such a wasteful survival strategy. Zethric activated the holographic display system, showing footage obtained from various sources across the galaxy. The first image showed a human medical ship surrounded by hegemony warships, broadcasting emergency medical aid to plague victims despite explicit orders to withdraw. This vessel, the Mercy's Hand, maintained quarantine relief operations for 6 days while under direct military threat, Zethric narrated. When hegemony forces finally opened fire, the crew continued working until their ship's destruction, saving over 40,000 Zilani refugees. The next image showed a human trade convoy that had encountered Krillian slavers attacking a passenger transport. Captain Jennifer Walsh's cargo fleet engaged superior forces to protect 300 civilian passengers. When asked why she risked valuable cargo and crew for strangers, her response was, because it was Tuesday, and Tuesday is a good day to do the right thing. Nervous laughter rippled through some sections of the assembly, but Zethric noticed that several representatives appeared thoughtful rather than amused. The most disturbing aspect, Zethric continued, is that human behavior appears to be infectious. Species that have interacted with humans are beginning to emulate their responses to crisis situations. He displayed a star map highlighting affected regions. Rebellion and independence movements have increased by 400% in areas of human contact. The Zelani Commonwealth has declared independence from the hegemony. The Alteran worlds have expelled Trade Federation labor contractors. 12 formerly compliant species have refused tribute payments and begun forming mutual defense pacts. Counselor Vraktesh's roar shook the chamber. This proves they must be stopped immediately. The humans are spreading chaos and disorder throughout civilized space. Or perhaps, a new voice interrupted, they're spreading something else entirely. All attention turned to the speaker, Representative Cassandra of the Tau Ceti Alliance, a small confederation that had maintained strict neutrality for centuries. Her blue-skinned, ethereal form rarely spoke during council sessions, making her intervention particularly noteworthy. Representative Cassandra, High Counselor Nexron acknowledged. You wish to address the Assembly? I do, High Counselor. My people have observed the human expansion with great interest. Unlike some counselors, we have actually studied their historical records and cultural patterns. She activated her own display, showing images from Earth's past. Humans have been fighting for the rights of others for their entire recorded history. They have repeatedly waged wars not for conquest or resources, but for abstract principles. The display showed historical battles and conflicts where humans had fought against oppression, slavery, and genocide. They call it fighting for freedom, and they have done it consistently across millennia, often at tremendous cost to themselves. Counselor Qual Nix's mandibles clicked aggressively. Ancient history is irrelevant. We must deal with the current threat to galactic stability. Is it a threat? Cassandra asked calmly. Or is it an opportunity? Our current system maintains order through fear and exploitation. But fear breeds resentment, and resentment eventually explodes into violence. The human model suggests an alternative based on voluntary cooperation and mutual protection. Naive idealism, Vraktesh snarled. The galaxy has always been ruled by the strong. That is the natural order. The humans are strong, Zethric found himself saying, surprising everyone, including himself. But their strength comes from their willingness to die for principles rather than profit. That creates a different kind of power, one that cannot be bought or negotiated away. High Counselor Nexron's censors word as he processed multiple data streams. Ambassador Zethric, do you believe humanity poses a military threat to the Council? Zethric considered the question carefully. Not in the conventional sense, High Counselor. Their technology is inferior, their numbers limited, and their territory minimal. But their example is spreading faster than any military conquest ever could. Then, we crush them quickly, before the infection spreads further, Counselor Thexmanar declared. A few examples will remind the lesser species why they should remain obedient. That may be inadvisable, Zethric warned. Human psychology appears to thrive on impossible odds. Combat losses only strengthen their resolve, and martyrdom enhances their influence. Military action could accelerate rather than contain their impact. The chamber erupted in arguments as different factions debated response strategies. Some called for immediate military intervention, others suggested economic sanctions, and a few proposed attempting to co-opt human leadership through traditional diplomatic bribes. Representative Cassandra waited for the noise to subside before speaking again. Honored counselors, I believe we are missing the fundamental issue. The question is not whether humanity poses a threat to the current order, but whether the current order deserves to survive. The chamber fell silent again, but this time the silence held dangerous undertones. Cassandra had crossed a line that no representative had ever dared approach. Our system has maintained peace for 3,000 years, High Counselor Nexron stated, his voice carrying warning harmonics. Stability requires hierarchy. Order demands control. Whose peace? Cassandra Khalingit. The 40 billion slaves in Krillian space? The genocide victims in hegemony territory? The indentured workers in Federation facilities? Our peace is built on the suffering of trillions. Counselor Vraktesh rose from his seat, his massive form radiating menace. Representative, you speak dangerously close to sedition. I speak truth, Cassandra replied without flinching. And truth is what humans represent. They show that another way is possible, that civilizations can be built on principles other than fear and exploitation. Zethric watched the interaction with growing unease. The human influence was already reaching into the council chambers themselves, inspiring representatives to challenge authorities they had never questioned before. The matter requires decisive action, High Counselor Next Run declared, cutting off further debate. A joint task force will be assembled to address the human problem through whatever means prove necessary. Counselor Vraktesh, you will coordinate military options. Counselor Qualnix, prepare economic pressure campaigns. Ambassador Zethric, you will return to human space with our final ultimatum. What ultimatum? Zethric asked, though he dreaded the answer. Humanity must cease all interference with established governmental structures and submit to council authority within 30 standard days, or face the consequences of their actions. As the session ended and representatives filed out of the chamber, Zethric found himself approached by Representative Cassandra. Her expression carried concern mixed with determination. Ambassador, she said quietly, I hope you understand what you witnessed today. The Council is preparing to make the same mistake that has destroyed countless civilizations throughout history. What mistake is that? They think they can defeat an idea with force, she replied. But humans don't just fight with ships and weapons. They fight with hope, and hope is the most dangerous weapon in the universe. She handed him a small data crystal. When you deliver the Council's ultimatum, also give them this. It contains testimonials from freed slaves, liberated populations, and rescued civilians across the galaxy. Perhaps the human leadership should understand exactly what they have accomplished in such a short time. Zethric accepted the crystal, feeling its weight seemed far greater than its physical mass. Representative, why are you helping them? Cassandra smiled sadly. Because 40 years ago, my daughter was enslaved by Krillian raiders. The Council called it an internal trade dispute and refused to intervene. She died in a labor camp while diplomats debated proper procedures. She turned to leave, then paused. When humans arrived in that sector 3 weeks ago, they freed every slave camp they could find. They were too late to save my daughter, but they saved thousands of others. They didn't ask for payment or territorial concessions. They just did what was right. As she walked away, Zethric stared at the data crystal in his tentacles. For the first time in his long diplomatic career, he began to question which side truly served the cause of civilization. The journey back to Earth would take 4 days, giving him time to review the testimonials Cassandra had provided. Each story painted the same picture. Humans arriving where others feared to go, fighting impossible odds to protect the innocent, and asking nothing in return except the chance to help. They were stories that challenged everything the Galactic Council claimed to represent. As his ship departed Nexus Prime, Zethric realized he faced an impossible choice. He could deliver the Council's ultimatum and watch 2 civilizations destroy each other in a war that neither wanted. Or he could find another way, one that honored both his diplomatic oath and his growing conviction that the humans might be right about the nature of justice. The universe was indeed trembling, but not from fear of human military might. It trembled because for the first time in millennia, someone had shown that the powerful could be challenged, that the oppressed could be freed, and that individual conscience could triumph over systemic corruption. The only question was whether that trembling would become an earthquake that shattered the old order entirely. The war began not with formal declarations or diplomatic ultimatums, but with a distress signal from the mining world of Kepler 442b. Ambassador Zethric was still 2 days out from Earth when the transmission reached both human and Galactic Council monitoring stations simultaneously. This is Colony Administrator Jennings on Kepler 442b. The panicked voice crackled through subspace static. We are under attack by unknown forces. They're targeting civilian areas. We have wounded children and can't evacuate. Anyone receiving this, please help us. Zethric watched the response unfold from his observation ship's command center. The Galactic Council's nearest patrol fleet was 6 hours away and had been ordered to maintain position pending further instructions. Standard Council protocol required confirmation of territorial jurisdiction, threat assessment, and authorization from 3 separate command levels before military intervention. The human response was immediate and devastating in its simplicity. This is Admiral Rebecca Torres commanding the human fleet determination, came the crisp reply just 14 minutes after the distress call. Kepler, 442b. We are 8 light minutes out and coming at full burn. Hold on. Humanity is coming. No request for authorization. No territorial negociaciones. No demand for payment or territorial concessions. Just a promise delivered with absolute conviction. What followed challenged every military doctrine Zethric had studied. The human fleet consisted of only 12 ships, a mixed group of converted cargo vessels, patrol craft, and 2 purpose-built warships. Intelligence reports indicated the attacking force was a full Krillian raider fleet, 37 vessels commanded by War Chief Scar 9, one of their most experienced leaders. By all tactical calculations, the humans were sailing toward annihilation. Admiral Torres, Zethric opened a communication channel to the human flagship. This is Ambassador Zethric of the Galactic Council. The attacking force significantly outnumbers your fleet. Perhaps diplomatic negotiation would be more appropriate. The response came immediately, tinged with what his translator identified as grim amusement. Ambassador, we appreciate your concern, but we don't negotiate with raiders attacking civilians. Besides, 12 to 37 isn't terrible odds for a Tuesday. Admiral, those are not favorable numbers by any reasonable military assessment. Maybe not, Torres replied, and now Zethric could hear combat alarms sounding in the background of her transmission. But you're thinking about this wrong. This isn't 12 ships against 37. This is 37 raiders against every human who ever learned that protecting innocence is worth dying for. The communication ended, leaving Zethric staring at his display screens as the human fleet dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of Kepler, 442b system. What happened next became legendary throughout the galaxy. The Krillian fleet detected the approaching humans and moved to intercept, confident in their numerical superiority. War Chief Scar 9 even transmitted a standard surrender demand, offering to spare the human ships if they withdrew immediately and paid appropriate tribute. Admiral Torres' response was broadcast on all frequencies. War Chief Scar 9, this is Admiral Rebecca Torres. We're here for the civilians you're attacking. You have 2 choices. Leave now, or we'll make you leave. You have 60 seconds to decide. Scar 9's reply was predictably contemptuous. Little mammals, you are outnumbered 3 to 1. Surrender now and die quickly, or flee and live to serve stronger species. Wrong answer, Torres said simply. The human fleet split into 3 groups and accelerated directly toward the Krillian formation, closing distance with reckless speed. Standard military doctrine called for cautious maneuvering, electronic warfare, and gradual tactical positioning. The humans ignored every rule of engagement Zethric had ever learned. The flagship Determination, leading the center group, launched itself directly at Scar 9's command vessel. As weapons fire erupted across space, Admiral Torres transmitted a message that was picked up by monitoring stations across the sector. To all Krillian vessels, I want you to understand something. You came here to hurt innocent people. That makes this personal for every human in this system. We're not just fighting to win. We're fighting to make sure you never hurt anyone again. The battle that followed defied all tactical analysis. Human ships fought with desperate creativity, using techniques that no military academy would teach because they were supposedly suicidal. Cargo vessels rammed enemy cruisers. Patrol craft deliberately sacrificed themselves to clear paths for their companions. The converted freighter New Shanghai manually detonated its power core to destroy 4 Krillian ships simultaneously. But it was Admiral Torres' final gambit that broke the enemy formation entirely. As her flagship took critical damage, she directed it on a collision course with Scar 9's dreadnought while transmitting on all frequencies. This is for every child you've terrorized, every family you've broken, every innocent life you've stolen. Humanity remembers, and humanity does not forgive. The Determination's impact with the Krillian command ship created an explosion visible from the planet's surface. When the energy discharge cleared, both vessels were gone, along with War Chief Scar 9 and Admiral Rebecca Torres. The remaining Krillian ships, faced with an enemy that seemed willing to trade their entire fleet for victory, broke formation and fled into hyperspace. Later intelligence reports indicated that many Krillian commanders refused further raiding operations in human space, claiming that the mad mammals fight like demons possessed. Of the 12 human ships that entered the battle, only 3 survived relatively intact. Total human casualties numbered over 4,000. By any military assessment, it should have been considered a devastating defeat. Instead, the Battle of Kepler, 442b became a rallying cry that echoed across the galaxy. Zethric arrived in system just as the surviving human vessels were coordinating rescue operations for the planet's civilian population. What he witnessed challenged his understanding of military and diplomatic priorities. The humans weren't celebrating their tactical victory or demanding tribute from the grateful colonists. Instead, they were organizing medical aid, temporary housing, and rebuilding assistance. The surviving fleet commander, Captain Maria Vasquez of the escort vessel Guardian, coordinated relief efforts with the same intensity her predecessors had shown in battle. Captain Vasquez, Zethric opened communication with the Guardian. I am Ambassador Zethric of the Galactic Council. I wish to express condolences for your losses and inquire about your intentions regarding this system. Captain Vasquez appeared on the view screen, her uniform torn and her face marked with exhaustion and grief. Behind her, Zethric could see crew members working frantically to coordinate aid shipments. Ambassador, thank you for your concern. Our intentions are simple. Help these people rebuild their homes and make sure they're never attacked again. Captain, I must point out that this system is not under human jurisdiction. The Galactic Council has protocols for territorial claims and resource allocation. Vasquez paused in her work, looking directly at the camera with an expression that made Zethric instinctively step backward. Ambassador, let me explain something about human jurisdiction. Anywhere that innocent people are being hurt is under our protection. Anywhere that children are crying for help is our territory. That's not a legal claim, it's a moral one. Before Zethric could respond, another transmission interrupted the conversation. It was Dr. Elizabeth Kane from Earth, her face appearing on split screen with Captain Vasquez. Captain, we've received Admiral Torres' final transmission. Her words are being broadcast across every human colony and ship in known space. The recording played with crystal clarity. To all humans receiving this message, remember why we fight. We fight because someone has to. We fight because silence is complicity. We fight because every child deserves to sleep safely, and every parent deserves to see their family again. If we die today, let it be for something that matters. Captain Vasquez wiped tears from her eyes, but her voice remained steady. Dr. Kane, the Admiral's message is being heard. We've received response transmissions from over 60 human vessels across 17 sectors. They're all changing course to assist with crisis situations. And it's not just humans anymore, Dr. Kane added. The Tau Ceti Alliance has formally declared the protection of civilian populations a fundamental right. The Zilani Commonwealth is sending medical ships to assist with refugee crises. Even some hegemony worlds are questioning their government's policies. Zethric realized he was witnessing something unprecedented in galactic history. The humans weren't just fighting isolated battles. They were inspiring systemic change across entire civilizations. Their example was spreading like wildfire, challenging the fundamental assumptions that underpin the established order. Captain, he said carefully, I bear a message from the Galactic Council. They demand that humanity cease interference with established governmental structures within 30 days, or face military consequences. Captain Vasquez shared a look with Dr. Kane that spoke volumes about human communication methods. When she turned back to the camera, her expression held the same predatory calm Zethric had seen in Secretary General Santos. Ambassador, please transmit this response to your superiors. We reject your ultimatum. We reject your authority. And we reject your system that values order over justice. Humanity will continue to protect the innocent wherever we find them, regardless of threats or consequences. Captain, the Council commands vast military resources. This decision will lead to war on a galactic scale. Then, there will be war, Vasquez replied with absolute conviction. But it will be a war between those who protect the innocent and those who exploit them. Let the galaxy decide which side deserves to win. AsZethric's ship departed Kepler, 442b, he reflected on what he had witnessed. The humans had lost 4,000 lives and most of their fleet, but they had gained something far more valuable, proof that their principles could triumph over superior force. More importantly, they had demonstrated that their way of thinking was infectious. Species across the galaxy were beginning to question why they accepted oppression why they tolerated exploitation, why they remained silent in the face of injustice. The testimonials on Representative Cassandra's data, Crystal, told similar stories from dozens of worlds. Former slaves who had been freed by human intervention. Oppressed populations inspired by human examples to resist their oppressors. Entire civilizations restructuring their societies based on principles of mutual aid and protection. Zethric began to understand why the universe trembled at humanity's approach. It wasn't fear of their military might that caused civilizations to reconsider their policies. It was the terrible possibility that the humans might be right about how societies should function. They had introduced a new concept into galactic politics. The idea that power should be used to protect rather than exploit, that strength should serve justice rather than self-interest, that advanced civilizations had moral obligations to help those who couldn't help themselves. As his ship entered hyperspace for the journey back to Nexus Prime, Zethric realized that the war was already over, even though the fighting had just begun. The Galactic Council could destroy every human ship, conquer every human world, and execute every human leader. But they couldn't destroy the idea that things could be better. And that idea, once released, would spread until it consumed the galaxy entirely. 6 months after the Battle of Kepler, 442b, Ambassador Zethric stood in the ruins of what had once been the most powerful military facility in the galaxy. The hegemony's fortress world of Vrakthal, supposedly impregnable, lay broken beneath a sky that still glowed with the aftermath of orbital bombardment. But the bombardment hadn't come from human ships. It had come from the fortress's own defensive systems, turned against their masters by the very slaves the hegemony had used to maintain them. It's beautiful, isn't it? The voice belonged to Captain Maria Vasquez, who approached through the rubble wearing the simple uniform of the Human Liberation Corps. Behind her walked a mixed group of beings from a dozen different species, all wearing similar uniforms with the same simple insignia, a circle of clasped hands surrounding a single star. "I'm not sure beautiful is the word I would choose," Zethric replied, his tentacles unconsciously tightening around his ceremonial staff. The death toll was enormous. "The dying was necessary," Vasquez said, her voice carrying the weight of someone who had made impossible decisions. "But that's not what I meant." She gestured toward the horizon, where massive construction vehicles operated by freed slaves were already beginning to build new structures. "Look at what they're building." Zethric followed her gaze and saw the unmistakable outlines of schools, hospitals, and residential complexes designed for diverse species requirements. No guard towers, no segregation barriers, no monuments to conquest. "They're building a city where their children can grow up free," Vasquez continued. "Former enemies working together because they've learned that freedom is worth sharing." The war that the Galactic Council had declared on humanity had lasted exactly 3 months and 17 days. It had ended not with military defeat, but with the complete collapse of the Council's authority as member species abandoned the organization en masse. Zethric had witnessed the final act personally. The Great Fleet assembled by Council of Raktesh had been the largest military force in recorded galactic history. Over 12,000 ships from 17 different civilizations, commanded by the most experienced officers in known space. They had arrived at Earth expecting to face desperate resistance from an outnumbered enemy. Instead, they had found themselves surrounded by the largest coalition fleet ever assembled. Over 50 species had sent ships to defend humanity, ranging from the massive dreadnoughts of the Tau Ceti Alliance to tiny patrol craft from newly liberated worlds. But it was the human response that had ended the war before a single shot was fired. Secretary General Santos had transmitted a message to every ship in both fleets. "To all beings preparing for battle today, we want you to know that humanity bears no hatred for any of you. We understand that many of you serve governments that have forced this conflict upon you. But we also want you to understand that we will never surrender the right to protect the innocent, and we will never abandon those who need our help." Then, she had done something unprecedented in military history. She had transmitted the complete tactical plans for Earth's defense, showing how human forces intended to respond to every possible attack scenario. "We're sharing this information," Santos explained, "because we want your crews to understand exactly what this war will cost. Not just in ships and resources, but in lives. We want every being on every vessel to know that we're prepared to die fighting for our principles. And we want you to decide if your government's principles are worth dying for." The effect had been immediate and catastrophic for the Council forces. Crew members began questioning their orders, demanding explanations for why they were attacking the one species that had consistently fought to protect the innocent. Entire ships abandoned the fleet, declaring neutrality or switching sides entirely. Within hours, the Great Invasion Force had disintegrated as mutinies, desertions, and defections reduced it to a fraction of its original strength. The few ships that remained loyal to their governments found themselves facing not just human defenders, but their own former allies. Councillor Vraktesh had died aboard his flagship, killed by his own security chief who had decided that some orders were worth refusing. The humans never fired the first shot, Zethric mused, watching as former hegemony slaves worked alongside their former guards to clear debris. They won by making their enemies question why they were fighting. We won because we forced the galaxy to confront a simple question, Vasquez corrected. What kind of civilization do you want to live in? One built on fear and exploitation, or one built on cooperation and mutual protection? Since the Council's collapse, over 200 worlds had declared independence from oppressive governments. The Krillian Syndicate had disintegrated as their slave populations rebelled with human support. The Trade Federation's labor camps had been liberated by coalitions of former victims working with human advisors. But the most significant change wasn't political or military. It was philosophical. Ambassador, Vasquez continued. Do you remember what you said when you first met with our leadership? You asked why humans fight for strangers. Zethric nodded, remembering that conversation in Earth's orbital station. I've been thinking about that question for months, Vasquez said. And I think I finally understand why you found our answer so difficult to accept. She led him toward a group of children playing in what had once been a hegemony detention center. The youngsters represented at least 8 different species, but they played together with the unconscious ease of beings who had never learned to see difference as division. Your species, all the Council species, learned to survive by competing with each other, by defining outsiders as threats or resources to be exploited. That made sense when resources were scarce and territory was limited. When the children, a young hegemony reptilian, fell and scraped her knee, immediately a human boy and a Tau Ceti girl rushed to help her up, offering comfort without hesitation. But humans evolved differently, Vasquez continued. We learned that our greatest strength came from cooperation, from taking care of each other, from expanding our definition of US to include everyone who needed help. Zethric watched the children play, noting how naturally they shared toys and included newcomers in their games. You're saying that humans aren't naturally more moral than other species, but that your evolutionary history made cooperation a survival trait. Exactly. And once that pattern was established, it became self-reinforcing. The more we helped others, the stronger our communities became. The stronger our communities became, the more we could help others. A new voice joined the conversation. It's also why our example spreads so quickly. Zethric turned to see Representative Cassandra approaching, now wearing the simple robes of the Liberated Worlds Coalition rather than her former council regalia. Representative Cassandra, I wasn't aware you were on Vrakthal. Former representative, she corrected with a smile. I'm here as an observer for the Coalition's Constitutional Committee. We're helping design governmental structures based on human principles of mutual aid and protection. And how is that progressing? Better than expected, Cassandra replied. Once species see that cooperation produces better results than competition, the transition becomes almost inevitable. Fear is a powerful motivator, but hope is stronger. Zethric looked around at the massive reconstruction effort surrounding them. Former enemies worked side by side, sharing resources and expertise freely. No one demanded payment for their assistance. No one calculated profit margins for their aid. I still struggle to understand it, he admitted. How can a civilization function without hierarchies of power, without systems of control and enforcement? Captain Vasquez smiled, the expression transforming her battle-scarred features. Ambassador, you're thinking about it backwards. Control and enforcement are what you need when you're trying to make people do things they don't want to do. But when everyone benefits from cooperation, when everyone's safety depends on everyone else's welfare, you don't need force to maintain order. You need trust, Cassandra added. And humans taught the galaxy how to build trust across species barriers. A commotion near one of the construction sites drew their attention. A group of workers had uncovered something buried beneath the fortress's foundation, a mass grave containing thousands of beings who had died in hegemony labor camps. Zethric expected anger, calls for vengeance, demands for retribution against the former oppressors. Instead, he witnessed something that challenged his understanding of justice itself. The workers, including many former hegemony citizens, stood in respectful silence as the remains were carefully removed for proper burial. No accusations were made, no blame assigned. The focus remained entirely on honoring the dead and ensuring such atrocities never happened again. Where is the justice in this? Zethric asked quietly. Where is the punishment for those responsible? Justice isn't about punishment, Vasquez replied, her voice carrying the weight of hard-learned wisdom. It's about preventing future harm. The best justice we can give these victims is to build a world where no one else suffers their fate. But surely some form of accountability is necessary. Accountability, yes. Vengeance, no. Captain Vasquez gestured toward a group of former hegemony officials working alongside freed slaves to identify the remains. Most of the beings who participated in these atrocities were following orders and systems that punish dissent with death. Breaking the system is more important than punishing individuals who were trapped within it. Representativa Cassandra noted. Humans taught us that the goal of justice should be healing rather than harm. That doesn't mean ignoring crimes, but it does mean focusing on solutions rather than retribution. As evening fell over Vrakthal, Zethric found himself joining a gathering in what had once been the fortress's command center. Beings from dozens of species shared simple meals while discussing plans for the future. Children played while their parents worked together on construction projects. The conversation was conducted in multiple languages, with universal translators handling the technical aspects while body language and shared purpose provided emotional context. Zethric observed former enemies laughing together, former slaves offering advice to former masters, former competitors sharing resources freely. This is why the universe trembles, he said suddenly, the realization hitting him with startling clarity. Captain Vasquez looked up from her conversation with a group of engineers. Ambassador, I finally understand, Zethric continued, his voice filled with wonder. The universe doesn't tremble because humans are great warriors, though you are. It doesn't tremble because you have superior technology or larger fleets, which you don't. He stood, addressing the entire gathering. The universe trembles because you proved that everything we believed about civilization was wrong. You showed that power can serve rather than exploit, that strength can protect rather than dominate, that advanced beings have obligations to help rather than harm. The conversation gradually quieted as more beings turned to listen. For millennia, Zethric continued, the galaxy operated on the assumption that conflict was inevitable, that the strong must rule the weak, that resources must be hoarded rather than shared. Every major civilization accepted these principles as natural law. And then humans arrived and demonstrated that natural law was actually just habit, Representative Cassandra added. Exactly. You didn't conquer the galaxy through force. You conquered it through example. You showed that another way was possible, and that example became irresistible. Captain Vasquez stood as well, her expression thoughtful. Ambassador, you speak of conquest, but that's not how we see it. We didn't set out to change galactic civilization. But you did change it, Zethric replied. Fundamentally and irreversibly. The old systems of exploitation and oppression are gone, replaced by networks of mutual aid and protection. Fear has been replaced by hope. Competition has been replaced by cooperation. And that transformation continues spreading, Cassandra noted. Every day, more worlds join the coalition. More species adopt principles of mutual protection. The change is accelerating because people can see that it works. Zethric looked around at the diverse gathering, seeing former council members working alongside freed slaves, former enemies planning joint construction projects, former competitors sharing resources without calculation or reservation. I have one final question, he said to Captain Vasquez. What happens now? Humanity has essentially remade galactic civilization in its own image. What are your species' plans for the future? Vasquez smiled, but her expression held something that madeZethric's heart skip several beats. It was the same predatory calm he had seen in human leaders throughout this crisis, but now he understood what it truly represented. Ambassador, she said softly. We're just getting started. She gestured toward the stars visible through the command center's transparent dome. There are millions of worlds out there we haven't reached yet. Billions of beings who still suffer under oppressive systems. Countless species who don't yet know that alternatives exist. The galaxy is large, Representative Cassandra added, and there's so much work to be done. As Zethric looked up at the vast expanse of space beyond Vrakthal's atmosphere, he finally understood why the universe would continue to tremble. Not from fear of human conquest, but from the unstoppable spread of human ideals. Hope was indeed the most dangerous weapon in the universe, because once ignited, it could never be completely extinguished. And humans had taught the galaxy how to hope for something better than survival. They had taught it to hope for justice. And justice, once awakened, would never rest until every corner of the universe knew that someone was watching, someone cared, and someone would always come when innocent beings called for help. The universe trembled because it was learning to become worthy of the principles humanity had shown were possible. And that transformation had only just begun.